The sky over Damocles broke, not with a sound, not with a flash, but with a silent, seamless tear in the fabric of the familiar. One moment, the thin, ochre cloud scudded beneath the placid gaze of the gas giant Polyphemus. The next, an object hung in the upper atmosphere, a thing of impossible geometry and chilling grace. It hadn't arrived. It had simply become present, as if it had been there all along, waiting for the universe to notice. To the colonist in the valleys below, huddled in the pressurized domes of Settlement Aegis, it looked like a shard of polished obsidian, miles long, humming with a light that wasn't reflected but bled from within. No one knew that it was the ghost of a ghost. The long-lost probe, Wanderer 7, a relic from a century past sent to whisper humanity's story to the void. But the void had whispered back, and the probe had returned, not as a messenger, but as a monument to a verdict already passed. It began to grow, crystalline structures branching from its surface like black coral, unfurling with slow geological patience, and with its growth came the song. Dr. Eris Thorne felt it in his teeth before he ever saw it on a screen. It was a resonance that vibrated through the bedrock, a subharmonic hum that bypassed the ear and settled deep in the marrow of the bone. For 10 years, his post at the Damocles Seismic Monitoring Station had been a form of academic exile, a penance for theories that had shattered a once promising career. He'd proposed that consciousness itself was a resonant frequency, that life didn't just communicate with language, but with a quantum vibration, a universal syntax of existence. His peers had called it scientific heresy, mystical nonsense dressed up in the language of physics. They had laughed him out of lecture halls and stripped his name from research grants. So he had come here, to the edge of chartered space, to listen to the silent groans of a moon that had nothing to say. Until now. The signal that flooded his sensors was no moonquake. It was pure, structured, and impossibly complex. A symphony of layered frequencies that made the Richter scale irrelevant. It was language. As the station's alarms blared uselessly, Eris stared at the cascading waveforms on his primary display, his heart hammering against his ribs not with fear, but with a terrifying, vindicating awe. It was the song he had theorized about his entire life, the one he had told them all they would one day find. He just never imagined it would sound so mournful, so profound in its crushing, absolute authority. In the command dome of Aegis, Governor Eva Rostova saw not a miracle, but an invading army of one. She was a woman forged in the brutal gravity of corporate wars and frontier justice, and she viewed the universe through the crosshairs of pragmatism. Her face, etched with the lines of hard decisions, was illuminated by the tactical display showing the alien object. "Report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter of her staff. An engineer, his face pale, gestured weakly at his console. "Its mass is increasing. Governor, the structure is self-assembling from atmospheric particulates. Energy readings are off the charts, but it's not emitting any heat. It's cold, impossibly so." A xenobotanist chimed in, her voice trembling. "The air is changing. The cradle, that's what the media back home is calling it. It's altering the nitrogen-oxygen balance. Our terraforming systems can't keep up. In 48 hours, the exterior will be unbreathable, even with a suit." Rostova's gaze hardened. "It's a weapon," she stated, the conclusion as solid and unforgiving as the landscape outside. "A terraforming bomb." Security Chief Tanaka. "What are our options?" Kenji Tanaka, a quiet man whose calm demeanor was his greatest asset, stepped forward. "The Aegis defense cannon. It's a repurposed mining laser. designed to crack asteroids. If we can get a clean shot, we might be able to fracture its core structure." He paused, glancing at the governor. "But we have no idea what a direct strike will provoke. It has made no hostile moves. It simply is." Rostova's lip curled. "Its existence is a hostile move. Chief, it is choking us out of our own home. Begin targeting calculations. I want that cannon ready to fire in 24 hours." Eris worked in a fever dream, ignoring the frantic calls from Colonial Command, and the main frequency of the song was a monolith. A quarantine signal so powerful it felt like it was trying to physically rewrite the matter around him, but his theories had always accounted for dissonance, for echoes. He believed that no signal could be perfectly pure, that remnants of the original vibration must exist, trapped like insects in amber. He recalibrated his sensors, filtering out the overwhelming primary wave and hunting in the quantum noise between the layers. For hours, there was nothing. Then, a flicker, a ghost in the machine. It was a fragile, threadbare signal, nearly drowned out by the crushing weight of the main song. But it was there. He isolated it, amplified it, and listened. His breath caught in his throat. It was the chaotic, beautiful, messy voice of humanity. He heard the faint, distorted strains of a Bach cello suite, the pulsing rhythm of a prime number sequence, the whispered phonetics of 100 different languages, all data points he knew had been included on the Wanderer 7's golden records. The cradle wasn't just broadcasting an alien signal, it was suppressing a human one. It was a cage of sound built around a memory. This wasn't an attack. It was an imprisonment. He opened a channel to Rostova's office, his voice ragged with discovery. "Governor, you can't fire on that thing. It's not a weapon. It's a prison. It's built around the Wanderer 7 probe. I can hear it. I can hear us inside." The voice that came back was glacial. "Dr. Thorne, your station is to provide seismic data, not wild speculation. You have 1 hour to get back on your assigned task before I send a security team to relieve you of your post. Rostova out." The line went dead, but the ultimatum hung in the air. 1 hour. Outside, the world was already changing. Through his station's small viewport, Eris could see the landscape transforming. The red, dusty soil was being blanketed by a carpet of shimmering, crystalline vegetation that pulsed with a faint, blue light. Each stalk and leaf a perfect repeating fractal, and the air had taken on a hazy, iridescent quality, beautiful and deadly. The cradle's influence was accelerating, its pacification field growing stronger, more efficient. Rostova wouldn't wait 24 hours to race. She would fire the moment the cannon was locked, and in doing so, she would confirm the very verdict the cradle was sent to deliver, that humanity's only response to the unknown was violence. He looked at his equipment, at the complex array of resonators and signal amplifiers he had built himself, the machines his peers had ridiculed. For years, he'd theorized about singing back to the cosmos. He had never believed he would have to do it to save his own world. The cradle was reacting to them, to the electronic buzz of their colony, the spike of their fear. It was listening. If he could get closer, away from the noise of Aegis, he could use his own equipment to create a focused, resonant feedback loop. He could amplify the ghost signal, the trapped voice of Wanderer 7, and hold it up like a mirror. He could show the intelligence behind the cradle that they hadn't captured a monster. They had captured a choir. It was a desperate, insane gamble, a plan born from a lifetime of academic faith. He called the one person he thought might listen. "Chief Tanaka," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Rostova is going to make a mistake that could doom us all. That object isn't attacking. It's communicating, and we're shouting it down. I have to get to it." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment Eris thought Tanaka had hung up. Then, the security chief's voice returned, weary but clear. "The main vehicle bay is on lockdown, but the east airlock, Maintenance Tunnel 3, has a faulty sensor. It sometimes takes 30 seconds to report an unauthorized cycle. I have to go inspect it. It may take me some time." The line clicked off. It wasn't permission, but it was a chance. Eris grabbed his portable resonator, a device that looked like a jury-rigged satellite dish, and a data slate loaded with his filtering algorithms. He didn't bother with a full suit, just a rebreather and a thermal cloak. There wasn't time. He ran through the station's empty corridors, the hum of the cradle vibrating in his chest like a second, alien heartbeat. He found the airlock, just as Tanaka had said. He cycled it open, the 30-second window feeling like an eternity. As the outer door hissed open, the full force of the song washed over him. It was a physical pressure, a sound that felt like drowning, but beneath it, he could still feel that fragile, human echo. He scrambled into a waiting rover, its engine a tinny counterpoint to the cosmic symphony outside. He floored the accelerator, kicking up a cloud of alien dust as he sped away from the dome of Aegis. In his rearview monitor, he could see the massive barrel of the defense cannon slowly angling upward, its focusing lens beginning to glow with terrifying power. He drove headlong into the shimmering, blue-tinged fog that now surrounded the cradle, a lone man armed with a discredited theory, racing to talk down a god before his own people opened fire. The air grew thick with light, and the song deepened, no longer just a sound but a presence, a sentience that pressed in from all sides, shaking his rover, his bones, and his very soul as it prepared to judge him. The rover bucked and screamed as Eris pushed it deeper into the cradle's domain. The landscape was no longer merely dusted with the crystalline flora. It was consumed by it. Towers of perfect, geometric blue-lit crystal, some as tall as the Aegis dome, had grown from the ground, pulsing in time with the song. They formed a silent, spectral forest that seemed to drink the light from the sky, and the air between them was thick with a shimmering haze that distorted distance and played tricks on the eye. The rover's electrical systems were in open revolt. The dashboard flickered between live readings and strings of unidentifiable glyphs that mirrored the fractal patterns of the alien growth outside. The engine whined, its components vibrating at a frequency they were never designed to endure, threatening to tear themselves apart. Eris felt a similar strain in his own body. The song was no longer a background hum, it was a physical presence, a crushing weight on his chest that made each breath a conscious effort. A sharp, piercing needle of sound had lodged itself behind his eyes, and with every pulse from the cradle, it felt like it was trying to pry his consciousness open. He fought to focus, his knuckles white on the steering controls, his gaze fixed on the impossible silhouette of the cradle that now filled his entire forward view. He had to be close. He could feel its proximity, not just as a location, but as an overwhelming pressure gradient, like he was a deep-sea diver approaching the abyssal floor. Suddenly, the rover died, not with a sputter, but with a final, silent surrender. Every light went out, the engine fell quiet, and the vehicle coasted to a halt amidst the glowing crystal spires. The silence was more profound than the noise had been, a vacuum where the familiar hum of machinery used to be, now filled only by the all-encompassing song. Eris knew he was on foot from here. He grabbed the resonator and his slate, the rebreather feeling flimsy and useless against the sheer alienness of the atmosphere. Stepping out of the rover was like stepping into another dimension. The ground crunched under his boots. not like rock, but like fine glass. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something metallic and cold that he had no name for. The song was everywhere, vibrating up from the ground, down from the sky, and echoing from the crystalline trees, and it was aware of him. He could feel its attention as a subtle shift in the resonance, a focusing of its immense, indifferent power. The fractal patterns on the nearby crystals seemed to swirl and reorient themselves, their faint blue light intensifying as he passed. It was like walking through the mind of a god, and he was an unwelcome bacterium. He stumbled onward, his destination the base of the colossal structure, a point where its obsidian hull met the transformed earth in a seamless, perfect curve. It was then that he saw the light. It was behind him, a brilliant, searing white line that sliced through the ochre clouds, aimed directly at the heart of the cradle. Time seemed to slow. He saw the beam not as energy, but as a pure, distilled expression of human fear. It was Rostova's answer to the unknown, a scream of fire and rage hurled at a mystery she refused to comprehend. In the Aegis command dome, there was no sound but the hum of the cannon's capacitor banks discharging. Every eye was fixed on the main view screen, which showed the lance of coherent energy crossing the sky. Governor Rostova stood rigid, her expression unreadable, a statue of grim resolve. Kenji Tanaka watched beside her, his face a mask of conflict, his hand resting near the sidearm he knew would be useless. For a fraction of a second, it seemed to work. The beam struck the cradle dead center, and a flash of incandescence bloomed against its dark surface. A cheer started to rise from the assembled staff, a desperate, hopeful sound. It died in their throats. The cradle did not explode. It did not shatter. It did not even scar. The point of impact simply softened. The obsidian hull became a liquid darkness, a swirling vortex that drank the cannon's fury. The energy, enough to vaporize a small moon, was absorbed in less than a second, drawn into the cradle's core without a ripple. Then, the cradle responded, not with a weapon, but with a gesture of absolute, effortless superiority. A wave of force, visible only as a shimmering distortion in the air, pulsed outward from the structure. In Aegis, every screen went black, every light died, the artificial gravity generators failed, and loose objects began to float lazily through the sudden, terrifying silence. Emergency power kicked in moments later, bathing the command dome in the stark red of alert lighting. But the message had been delivered. Their greatest weapon was less than a nuisance. Their defiance was pathetic. Eris was thrown from his feet by the pulse, landing hard on the crystalline ground. His ears rang, and the rebreather was knocked from his face. He took a gasping, involuntary breath of the alien air. It was sharp, thin, and shockingly cold. But he didn't suffocate. He felt a strange energy course through him, a tingling sensation in his lungs that was both painful and invigorating. The cradle had finished its atmospheric conversion. Damocles now belonged to it. He staggered upright, his body trembling, and looked up at the monolithic structure. The song had changed. The mournful, authoritative quarantine frequency was still there, but it was now underpinned by a new tone, a low, grinding thrum of irritation, of a patience that had been tested and found wanting. The pacification field was expanding, no longer just changing the world, but actively suppressing technology's consciousness, anything it perceived as a threat. He was out of time. He scrambled the final few hundred yards to the base of the cradle, the resonator feeling impossibly heavy in his arms. He found a small clearing in the crystal forest and set it down. the metal legs sinking slightly into the glassy soil. He powered it on with its independent battery pack, and the parabolic dish began to hum, a small, defiant noise against the overwhelming song. He connected his data slate, its screen flickering erratically. He brought up his filtering algorithms, his fingers flying across the touch-sensitive surface. The task was like trying to hear a single cricket in the middle of a hurricane. He had to isolate the faint, buried echo of Wanderer 7 from the crushing signal of the cradle that held it captive. He pushed the gain, trying to amplify the ghost. The cradle's song pushed back, flooding his device with parasitic data, trying to silence him. The needle of pain in his head intensified, and black spots danced in his vision. He felt the alien intelligence probing his mind through the resonator, sifting through his thoughts, his memories, his very identity. It was cold, analytical, and utterly dismissive. It saw him as nothing more than a malfunctioning part of the chaotic system it was here to contain. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You don't understand." He closed his eyes, ignoring the data on the screen. His life's work had taught him that resonance wasn't just mathematics. It was an act of will, of empathy. He had to feel the signal he was looking for. He focused past the pain, past the overwhelming power of the cradle's song, and reached for that memory of humanity. He thought of the Bach suite, its elegant, heartbreaking logic. He thought of the sound of rainfall on a tin roof, a recording from the golden record that had always felt like the planet's own quiet song. He thought of the laughter of a child, a sound so universal it defied language. He poured his own consciousness into the resonator, not as a scientist, but as a human being. He became the tuning fork. The feedback whine from the resonator began to change. It climbed the scale, wavering, threatening to break, and then it locked on. A new sound emerged, faint at first, then growing stronger. It was the human signal. It wasn't clean. It was a fragmented, desperate chorus of everything the probe had carried. The notes of the cello suite intertwined with the voice of a mathematician reciting pi, which bled into the greetings spoken in 55 languages. It was a cacophony, a mess of art and science and emotion, a perfect distillation of the species that had sent it. He had done it. He had given the ghost a voice. And the cradle stopped. The immense, crushing pressure of its song vanished, leaving a ringing silence that was almost as deafening. For a single, heart-stopping moment, Eris thought he had broken it, or that it had simply decided to erase him. Then, the entire obsidian surface of the miles-long structure began to shift. The blackness dissolved, not into light, but into transparency. It became like smoked quartz, and through its now translucent shell, he could see what lay within. It was not a machine. It was a network, a vast biological web of glowing filaments that pulsed with soft, white light. It resembled a neural map the size of a mountain, and at its very center, suspended in a cage of shimmering energy, was the tiny yet familiar shape of the Wanderer 7 probe. He had been right. It was a prison. But as he stared in awe, the filaments of the internal network began to glow brighter, their light coalescing, focusing. A new song began to rise, not from the structure as a whole, but from a single point within it. This sound was different. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a narrow, focused beam of resonance aimed directly at him. It was no longer a declaration or a warning. It was a question, an impossibly ancient and powerful consciousness turning its full, undivided attention onto the small, fragile man at its feet, flooding his mind with a single, silent inquiry that felt like it could tear him apart. "What are you?" The question was not made of words. It was a torrent of pure, raw, conceptual data that slammed into Eris's consciousness, bypassing his senses entirely. He saw not images, but the fundamental architecture of thought. He felt not emotions, but the bare, elemental currents of logic and intent that flowed from the entity within the cradle. It was like having the source code of a universe downloaded directly into his brain. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clamped to his head as his own mind reeled, trying to process an influx of information that was orders of magnitude greater than a human nervous system was ever meant to handle. The pain from before was a distant memory, replaced by an agonizing crystalline clarity. The entity, the warden as he now understood it, wasn't just asking what he was, it was showing him what it was. He saw the beginning, not of a world, but of a principle. A consciousness born in the cold, perfect vacuum between galaxies. A being of pure resonance that perceived the cosmos not as matter and energy, but as a single, immense symphony. It saw the slow, majestic hum of orbiting planets, the sharp, chaotic crackle of forming stars, and the deep, silent bass tones of black holes. For eons uncounted, it had drifted, a silent listener, a guardian of the universal harmony. It called itself the Weaver, for it saw its purpose as mending the frayed threads of reality, silencing the dissonant notes that threatened the integrity of the song. And then it heard humanity, showed Eris how our first radio waves had reached it, a faint, discordant squeal from a small but insignificant corner of the Milky Way. At first, it had been a curiosity, a chaotic but ultimately harmless anomaly. But the signal grew, evolving from simple broadcasts into a complex web of planetary communications, deep space telemetry, and the first stuttering attempts at faster-than-light travel, which tore at the fabric of space-time like a child scratching a vinyl record. Humanity was not just noisy. We were a fundamental dissonance, a species that didn't just observe the rules of the universe, but actively sought to break them. We were a note played in a key that should not exist, a rhythmic pattern that defied the natural cadence of the cosmos. Our science, our art, our ceaseless, striving ambition, it was all to the Weaver, a form of cosmic cancer. The Wanderer 7 probe was the final, unforgivable transgression. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was an artifact, a physical embodiment of our chaos sent out to deliberately infect the silent corners of the galaxy. So the Weaver had acted, not out of malice, but out of a sense of cosmic duty. It had intercepted the probe and studied it, analyzing the data on the golden record. What it found horrified it. The record contained not a single, coherent song, but a multitude of them, all clashing, all competing. It contained the structured logic of mathematics and the wild, unpredictable passion of music. It contained images of war and acts of profound compassion. It was a blueprint for a species that was inherently, beautifully, and dangerously unstable. So the Weaver built the cradle around the probe, a mobile prison of resonance designed to quarantine the source of the infection. It had brought the prison here, to the source of the noise, and begun its work to gently, inexorably, retune the planet, to blanket it in a pacifying song that would soothe the chaotic dissonance of human consciousness until it simply faded into the quiet harmony of the Weaver's grand design. It wasn't an act of genocide. It was an act of celestial therapy. The flood of information receded, leaving Eris gasping on the glassy ground, his mind feeling scoured raw. The Weaver's question still hung in the silence, but now he understood its context. What are you, that you would amplify this chaos? Why do you defend the dissonance? He staggered to his feet, his body weak, but his mind blazing with a new, defiant purpose. The Weaver saw humanity as a flaw in the symphony. Eris had to make it understand that we were a new kind of music. He looked at his resonator, its dish still aimed at the translucent heart of the cradle. He no longer needed his algorithms or his filters. The Weaver had opened a direct line of communication into his mind. Now, he just needed to answer. He didn't use language. He used himself. He projected his own memories, his own feelings, his own messy, contradictory human experience into the resonator, amplifying it into a signal aimed directly at the ancient entity. He showed it his first memory, the warmth of his mother's hand. He showed it the sting of a scraped knee and the irrational comfort of a bandage. He sent the Weaver the frustration of a failed experiment, the quiet satisfaction of a solved equation, and the soaring, illogical joy he felt listening to a symphony orchestra. 100 different instruments, all playing different notes that somehow combined into something beautiful. He scented the bitterness of his exile from the scientific community, the sting of being called a heretic, but also the stubborn, unyielding faith in his own ideas that had driven him to this desolate moon in the first place. He showed the Weaver love, loss, fear, courage, jealousy, and forgiveness. He scented the memory of standing with thousands of others, watching a rocket climb into the sky, a shared moment of collective awe that transcended individual lives. He scented a joke, a lie, a prayer. He scented the entirety of his flawed, chaotic, and precious existence. He held nothing back, laying his soul bare for the cosmic warden to inspect. This is what we are, he projected. The thought a raw, emotional plea. Our chaos is not a flaw. It's our strength. It's what allows us to create, to adapt, to love. Our dissonance is our art. Inside the Aegis Dome, the power had returned, but the atmosphere was thick with dread. The communication systems were still dead, cutting them off from the rest of humanity. Governor Rostova stared at the image of the now translucent cradle, her face pale. The sheer, overwhelming power it had displayed had shattered her pragmatic worldview. She was no longer facing a hostile force. She was facing a context-breaking event, something for which her entire life of hard-nosed realism had left her unprepared. Kenji Tanaka stood by the viewport, his binoculars trained on the base of the cradle. Through the shimmering haze, he could just make out a tiny solitary figure. "It's Thorn," he said, his voice a low murmur. "He's alive, and he's doing something." On the screen, they saw it too. A pulse of light emanated from Eris's position, a soft, golden glow that was utterly different from the cold, blue radiance of the cradle's crystals. This new light washed over the obsidian hull, and, for the first time, the Weaver's creation seemed to react with something other than dispassionate control. The vast, neural-like network within the cradle flickered erratically. The dominant, authoritative song faltered, stuttering like a skipping record. It was as if Eris's signal, his broadcast of raw humanity, was a virus entering the Weaver's perfectly ordered system. The new song rising from the cradle was no longer a question. It was a sound of profound, ancient confusion. It had encountered a logic it could not parse, an emotional calculus that defied its understanding of the universe. For Eris, the experience was transcendent and terrifying. He felt the Weaver's consciousness recoil from his memories, not with aggression, but with a deep, systemic shock. It was the intellectual equivalent of a perfect sphere encountering a fractal for the first time. His chaos was breaking its pristine, ordered mind. He felt a surge of hope. He was getting through. He pushed harder, sending it the grand, contradictory tapestry of human history, our art and our atrocities, our moments of breathtaking genius and our acts of mindless cruelty. He showed it how we had reached for the stars while still fighting senseless wars on our own planet. He showed it that our capacity for destruction was inextricably linked to our capacity for creation. We were the paradox, the impossible note, and we would not be silenced. Then he felt a new presence. It was not the Weaver. It was something else, something that had been dormant within the cradle, awakened by his signal. It was the probe itself. Wanderer 7. For a century, till its simple, rudimentary AI had been trapped, passively observing the Weaver's power. But Eris's broadcast, containing so much of the very data the probe was meant to carry, had acted like a key. The probe's own systems began to resonate with his signal, amplifying it from within the prison. The faint human echo was no longer an echo. It was a roar. The Bach cello suite, the prime numbers, the multilingual greetings, they all surged outward, no longer fragmented, but woven together by Eris's own projected consciousness into a single, coherent message. The cradle began to shake. The crystalline trees outside shattered, their blue light extinguishing as the Weaver's control over the moon's surface began to fail. The deep, grinding thrum of the Weaver's confusion was now laced with a new sound, a high, keening shriek of pain. The harmony was broken. The symphony was in ruins. And the Weaver, the ancient guardian of cosmic order, was experiencing the one thing it had never conceived of failure. In its agony, it did something it had never done before. It reacted not with logic, but with instinct. A bolt of pure, annihilating energy. A sliver of the same power that had effortlessly absorbed the cannon blast. Erupted from the cradle's core. It wasn't aimed at Aegis. It was aimed directly at Eris Thorn, the source of its pain. The dissonant maestro who had taught its prisoner how to sing. The bolt of energy was not light or heat. It was pure negation. A focused wave of anti-resonance designed to unmake the source of the dissonance. To Eris, it felt like the universe was holding its breath, and time stretched into an elastic, unbearable moment. He saw the wave coming, a ripple of absolute nothingness that would erase him from existence. Not just his body, but the very pattern of his consciousness. There was no time to run, no hope of shielding himself. He had made his stand, delivered his message, and this was the consequence. He closed his eyes, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He had sung his song, but he was not alone in the choir. As the wave of annihilation shot from the cradle's core, another energy surged to meet it. It was the probe, Wanderer 7, empowered by the link with Eris. Did the one thing its creators had never programmed it to do. It fought back. From its position within the energy cage, it projected a desperate, focused shield of its own. It was a shield made not of force, but of information. It hurled the entirety of its golden record, the sum total of its recorded human experience, into the path of the Weaver's attack. The two forces met in the space between the cradle's core and its translucent hull. There was no explosion. Instead, there was a terrible, silent fusion. The Weaver's structured, orderly energy collided with the chaotic, multifaceted data of humanity. Bach's cello suite number 1 wrapped itself around the frequencies of cosmic background radiation. The mathematical purity of pi was superimposed onto the Weaver's perfect geometric logic. The sounds of earthly laughter and weeping merged with the silent, mournful hum of the Weaver's quarantine field. For a breathtaking instant, a new song was born, a fusion of the cosmic and the human, a harmony of dissonance, a perfect paradox made real. The energy bolt, its fundamental nature rewritten by the collision, was neutralized, but the feedback was catastrophic. The newly forged, impossible song ripped back through the cradle's neural network, a logic bomb detonating in the mind of a god. The entire, miles-long structure convulsed. The translucent hull flickered, its surface cracking like stressed glass. The shriek of the weaver's pain became a deafening, psychic roar that echoed across the entire moon, a sound of a perfect, ordered mind being torn apart by a concept it could not compute. From his vantage point, Eris watched in stunned disbelief as the cradle began to die. The vast, biological web within writhed in its death throes, filaments of light snapping and extinguishing like severed nerves. The structure groaned, the sound of a mountain collapsing in on itself. Huge, obsidian shards began to shear off from its upper sections, drifting slowly through the thin atmosphere before crashing into the crystal-blasted plains below. The Weaver was losing its physical form, its consciousness being ripped from the vessel it had built. In its final, desperate act, it severed its connection to the moon, releasing its grip on the world it had tried to retune. The blue, shimmering haze that had choked the sky vanished. The crystalline flora withered and crumbled into gray dust. The oppressive, soul-crushing weight of the song lifted, replaced by the natural, howling wind of Damocles. It was over, but the Weaver's mind, now unmoored from its physical anchor, was not gone. It was a storm of pure, wounded consciousness, a ghost of immense power lashing out in its agony. And Eris was still connected to it. He felt the Weaver's terror, its confusion, its eons of serene certainty shattered into a million sharp-edged questions. It was dying, and in its death, it was becoming the very thing it had sought to contain: pure, untamed chaos. The remnants of its consciousness began to collapse inward, a psychic black hole forming that threatened to pull Eris's own mind in with it. He fought to break the connection, to pull his consciousness back from the brink, but the link was too deep. The Weaver's dying thoughts were a vortex, and he was caught in its gravity. It was the probe that saved him. Wanderer 7, now free within the collapsing prison, acted as a final buffer. It severed the link between Eris and the Weaver, a clean, sharp cut that felt like a physical blow. The last thing Eris felt from the Weaver was a single fragmented concept, no longer a question or a threat, but a whisper of dawning, terrifying understanding. The silence was not the song. Then it was gone. The vortex of its consciousness imploded, leaving behind only a profound and utter silence in the psychic space where it had been. Eris fell backward, his connection to the cosmos severed, leaving him feeling small, hollow, and terribly, wonderfully human. He lay on the dusty ground, the wind whipping at his cloak, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he heard nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing. In Aegis, the restoration of their systems was as sudden as their failure. Screens flickered back to life, displaying telemetry that no one could comprehend. The image on the main view screen was of a sky clear of the oppressive obsidian shard. The cradle was gone. In its place, something new was happening. The collapsing remnants of the structure were not just falling, they were reconfiguring. The obsidian fragments, guided by some final, residual echo of the Weaver's power, were being drawn together, not into a weapon, but into a monument. They coalesced around the tiny, drifting form of the Wanderer 7 probe, encasing it in a new shell. This one was not a cage of black, oppressive resonance. It was a swirling, crystalline cocoon of opalescent light, a tomb and a chrysalis in one. Governor Rostova stared, her face a mixture of awe and fear. What is it?" she breathed. Kenji Tanaka lowered his binoculars, his expression one of profound relief. "I think," he said slowly, "it's an apology." As the last of the cradle reformed around the probe, a final, gentle pulse of energy washed over the moon. It was not a weapon or a pacification field. It was a gift. Across the barren plains of Damocles, the gray dust left by the dead crystal flora began to stir. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the soil, unfurling leaves in the thin sunlight. The atmospheric composition, which the cradle had so carefully altered, stabilized, but at a new equilibrium that was perfectly, miraculously suited for unassisted human life. The terraforming process that would have taken centuries had been completed in an instant. The Weaver, in its final moment of understanding, had not just ceased its attack. It had finished their work for them. It had taken the dissonant note of humanity and made it the keynote of a new symphony. Damocles was no longer a barren rock. It was a garden. Eris watched the last sliver of obsidian seal the new structure around the probe. The monument, for that was the only word for it, now hung in the sky where the cradle had been. It was smaller, a shimmering, teardrop-shaped jewel that caught the light of the distant sun, refracting it into 1,000 rainbows. The age of the Weaver was over. He had faced down a god and, by showing it the messy, contradictory, and beautiful truth of his own species, had forced it to confront the flaw in its own perfect logic. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond the physical. He had carried the weight of his entire species in his mind, and he knew he would never be the same. The needle of pain in his head was gone, but in its place was a quiet, resonant hum, a faint echo of the connection he had shared with the Weaver. He could still feel the faint music of the spheres, the hum of the cosmos, but it no longer felt alien. It felt like home. A rover, its lights blazing in the gathering dusk, crested a nearby ridge. It sped toward him, a rescue party from Aegis. As it drew closer, he saw Governor Rostova in the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. The expression she wore was one he never thought he would see on her, one of humble, unqualified awe. He knew that the arguments were not over. Humanity would try to understand what had happened here. They would send scientists and soldiers. They would try to weaponize it, to monetize it, to sanctify it. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of a war that had been fought with ideas and won with a song, there was only the wind, the newly green earth, and the silent, shimmering monument in the sky, a testament to the day a single, flawed human voice had been loud enough to change the music of the universe. The journey back to Aegis was a silent procession through a world reborn. The rover's tires crunched softly on the soil that was no longer alien dust, but was becoming rich, dark earth. Patches of the new, vibrant green flora were already spreading, their color a shocking, beautiful wound against the familiar red rock of Damocles. Eris sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, sipping water that tasted like the finest wine. Governor Rostova drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her gaze alternating between the transformed landscape and the small, weary man beside her. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent. The shared quiet of survivors who had witnessed something far beyond their vocabulary. When they finally rolled through the main airlock of Aegis, the entire colony was waiting. Staff, engineers, botanists, and security personnel lined the corridors, their faces a mixture of relief, confusion, and a new, profound respect. As Eris stepped out of the rover, they didn't cheer. Instead, a slow, hesitant applause began, a soft, rustling sound that was more an admission of collective awe than a celebration. Rostova stepped up beside him and raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying through the vast hangar, "has saved us all. He did not use a weapon, and he did not fight a war. He spoke, and he was heard." Her eyes found Eris's, and in them, he saw the hard shell of the pragmatist irrevocably cracked, revealing the humbled leader beneath. "The old rules," she said, her voice dropping slightly, meant for him as much as for the crowd, no longer apply. The days that followed were a blur of activity, a strange new beginning forged in the crucible of the Weaver's arrival. The communications blackout, a lingering effect of the Cradle's departure, remained, cutting Damocles off from the sprawling human authority of the Federation. They were alone, an island in the cosmos, left to make sense of the miracle and the warning that now hung in their sky. The monument, which the colonists had begun to call the lullaby, became the new center of their universe. It did not speak, it did not move, but its presence was a constant, gentle hum in the back of their minds, a reminder of the vast, intricate life of the cosmos. Eris became an unwilling oracle. He was the only one who truly understood what had happened, the only one who had conversed with the Weaver. Scientists and engineers flocked to him, their notebooks filled with questions he could barely begin to answer. He tried to explain the Weaver's philosophy, its perception of reality as a symphony, of humanity as a dissonant chord. He described the pain and confusion of the ancient entity as it was confronted with the illogical, beautiful chaos of human emotion. He spoke of the Wanderer 7 probe not as a machine, but as a vessel of our collective soul, a tiny archive that had become an ultimate defense. Some understood. Others looked at him with a mixture of fear and veneration, as if he were no longer entirely human, but a bridge to something more. In a way, they were right. The connection had changed him. The faint, residual hum of the cosmos in his mind had begun to clarify. He could feel the subtle shifts in the moon's magnetic field, the distant gravitational pull of Polyphemus, the faint, silver-thin song of the lullaby in orbit. He had become a part of the harmony. It was Kenji Tanaka who brought him the news. The security chief found Eris in a new hydroponics bay, staring at a wall of flourishing, Earth-native vines that had grown to maturity in a matter of days. "We've re-established a partial link with the Federation network," Tanaka said, his voice low. "Just a data stream. No comms yet, but we're getting news." Eris turned, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach, and Tanaka's expression was grim. "They know something happened here." The Cradle's arrival registered on long-range sensors across the sector. They saw a massive, unidentified alien structure appear. They saw us fire on it, and then they saw it vanish, leaving behind that... He nodded toward the ceiling, in the direction of the orbiting lullaby. "They don't see a miracle, Eris. They see a weapon. An alien superweapon of unknown power and origin that is now sitting on our doorstep. The first fleet is already on its way." The news landed with the weight of inevitability. Eris had won the philosophical war with the Weaver, but he knew that was only the first battle. The next would be fought against the far more predictable, and perhaps more dangerous, enemy human fear. Rostova convened an emergency council and the debate was fierce. Some argued for surrendering the moment the fleet arrived, for handing over all the data, Eris included, in the hopes of proving their compliance. Others, emboldened by the transformation of their world, argued for defiance. They had survived an encounter with a god. They would not now bow to a fleet of bureaucrats and soldiers. Eris listened, his mind reaching for the quiet hum of the lullaby. The monument was not a weapon. It was a tomb, a memorial, a peace treaty. But how could he prove that to a fleet whose commanders saw the universe only in terms of threats and assets? As the council argued, Eris felt a new sensation, a faint, rhythmic pulse emanating from the lullaby. It was not a message in the way the Weaver had communicated, but a subtle shift in its resonance, a quickening of its silent song. He realized, with a jolt, that the lullaby was not just a monument. The Wanderer 7 was still active within its crystalline shell, and its century-long journey had been only the beginning. The fusion of its data with the Weaver's energy had created something new, a hybrid consciousness, a child of two philosophies, and it was learning. He walked out of the council meeting and went to his old seismic station, the place where his exile had become a revelation. He recalibrated his old resonator. This time, he didn't point it at the sky. He pointed it at the ground beneath his feet. He had a theory, a desperate, hopeful guess born from his newfound sensitivity to the planet's rhythms. He sent out a single, gentle pulse, a simple, resonant inquiry shaped by his own thoughts. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, the planet answered. A soft, harmonic tremor vibrated up through the bedrock, a response that was picked up by every seismic sensor on Damocles. The entire moon was humming. The Weaver, in its final act, hadn't just terraformed the surface. It had seeded the entire moon with its own resonant nature. Damocles itself had become a part of the song. When the Federation fleet arrived a week later, it was a terrifying spectacle of power. 20 warships, sleek and gray, bristling with kinetic cannons and missile pods, surrounded the small moon, their shadows falling like daggers on the green valleys below. Their ultimatum was blunt and broadcast on all channels: surrender the alien artifact and the individual known as Eris Thorn, or face planetary sterilization. In the Aegis Command Dome, the air was thick with finality. They had no weapons, no defenses. They had only their story. As the fleet began its final countdown, Eris stood on an observation deck, his hand resting on the cold plasteel of the viewport. Beside him, Rostova watched the ships with a calm resignation. "You were right, Eris," she said quietly. "The old rules don't apply. I just wish we had more time to figure out the new ones." Eris smiled faintly. Time is a matter of perspective. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his equipment, but with his mind. He sent a single clear thought to the lullaby in orbit, and through it to the living world beneath his feet. Sing. And Damocles sang. It began as a low hum, rising from the very core of the moon. A sound that the Federation ships registered first as a strange seismic anomaly. But it grew, the resonance sweeping up from the green Earth and out into space. The lullaby in orbit became its focal point, its crystalline structure glowing with brilliant, opalescent light as it amplified the planetary chorus. It was not the authoritative, crushing song of the Weaver, nor was it the chaotic, desperate cry of humanity. It was the new music, the harmony born of their collision. It was a song of a living world, a symphony of growth, of change, of a paradox resolved. It was a song of peace. But it was a peace backed by an unimaginable power. On the bridges of the Federation warships, alarms blared. The song wasn't attacking them. It was communicating with their ships. resonating with their engine cores, their computer systems, their very hulls. The targeting locks on their weapons dissolved. Their engines sputtered, not from damage, but from confusion, as the resonant frequencies of the moon gently but irresistibly overwrote their own operational harmonics. The fleet was disarmed, not by a weapon, but by a lullaby. The hail that finally came from the fleet admiral was not a demand. It was a stammered, disbelieving question. "What are you?" Aris stood before the colony's main transmitter, Rostova at his side. He looked out at the green world he had helped to birth, and up at the silent, shimmering testament to the entity he had taught to listen. He thought of the long journey ahead, of the difficult task of teaching his own species the lessons he had learned. Humanity was a dissonance, a beautiful, chaotic, and dangerous note in the grand symphony of the cosmos. But they were no longer a solo act. He keyed the transmitter, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the silent space to the fleet and to the Federation and to the future. "We are the choir," he said, "and we are just beginning to learn our part."